Well, good morning and good afternoon to you, wherever you may be as you tune in today. And thank you for joining us. For those who have joined us for the first time, this webinar series is focused on HR and workplace topics with a lens of culture and diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. I'm Sonya Sepahban, CEO of OurOffice, where we help organizations with the process, the expertise, and the data and technology you need to build a more inclusive workplace. Our end-to-end solution for workplace culture and DEI works especially well for small and medium organizations who want to focus on DEI, but maybe stretch too thin for time or resources. So first, I want to thank Stéphane Charbonnier, CHRO at L'Oréal USA, for joining us today. So thank you, Stéphane.
Thank you for having me, Sonia. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. We will talk about how we can achieve a workplace culture with a sense of togetherness in this hybrid environment. But before we do that, and we'll get to know Stéphane more, but I want to make sure that you're familiar with the logistics for this webinar. So, of course, everybody knows Zoom these days, but this is an interactive webinar. So we'll have a few polls throughout to get your inputs as part of the conversation. We ask you to please engage. And please note the chat function to provide your comments. A lot of times we have pretty interesting comments and dialogue that goes on. And we also welcome questions, throughout the webinar. You can put it in the Q&A. We have one of my colleagues at our office, Anushka Sarif, who will be moderating the questions in real time and chiming in as needed. So thanks in advance, Anushka. We will answer as many questions as we can also at the end. And even afterwards, if needed, if you can put your email address in with your question. Please also note that this session is being recorded and will be available after the webinar on our events page. That's at OurOffice, one word, OurOffice.io/events. Last but not least, this webinar is approved for SHRM and HRCI recertification credits. You will find the activity codes on the last slide. Now, as we said, we will talk about togetherness and workplace culture. So let's start by getting to know how important workplace culture is to your audience, shall we? So let's go to the first poll, if we may. And so here we want to find out if you can rate your organization in workplace culture and DEI. Do you believe that your organization is aware, focused, progressive, world-class, or maybe you're not sure? Now, there's a bit of a definition on each of these in case you are not sure about that. So here's the definitions. And we're going to give it just a couple of seconds more here just to see. And, this is actually a little bit more skewed. And as people are joining us, I know that in the future course, we'll have more people online here with us, but it shows about 2/3 progressive and 1/3 focused. That's a little bit on the high side in terms of being more progressive, but also the audience that we attract tend to be more progressive. There is one that's not sure, they're 25%. But most of the time we see that most people are in the aware or focused stages and some in progressive. So we'll see about 40% aware, maybe 30% focused, maybe 15, 20% progressive, and so on. So with that, let's just find out a little bit more about Stéphane, as we said. So Stéphane, let's start with your personal story. Can you please share a bit about yourself, your background, and experiences that really have made you this global HR leader that you are today, and with a focus on what you call this sense of togetherness as a key goal? Where did it all come from? And we would love to get to know you better.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure to be here. So I've been working in the field of HR for the past 30 plus years in various capacity, in individual contributor role, in leadership role over a market function, multi-country and global roles. I started my career in the country I was born, in France. Then I moved to the UK for a few years, and then I've been in the US for now 14 years. and working mostly for US companies until I joined L'Oréal, actually, although I was born in France, my country of origin. I didn't work for any French company before I came to the US. So that was the interesting piece. And so that's on the professional side. And again, I've navigated my roles between center of expertise type of role, whether it was talent acquisition or total rewards or learning, to more HR generalist role, again, supporting functions, supporting countries or multi-countries or global role when I was in COE role. So multitudes of roles and different experiences. If I'm thinking about, so that's on the professional side. On the personal side, I am married with 5 children, and I'll get back to the sense of togetherness. We have what we call the International Brady Bunch. We're a recomposed family, and that certainly sense of togetherness that we strive for at L'Oréal. I can tell you, I've been working very hard. My wife and I have been working very hard to create that sense of togetherness as well within our family. Certainly, when I think about the global HR leader I became, it was really built, I would say, by on some area very consciously and very deliberate about building some skills, making sure that when I was an HR generalist, I wanted to go on the other side and make sure I was going to learn more on the COE side. How do you design? How do you collaborate in building some HR processes or tools that will be then deployed at scale? I really wanted to learn how it was done. When it came to executive compensation, as an example, working in the C-suite with the board of director of a public company and understanding what are the levers, how do you sort of manage that executive, compensation type of area that is critical, was something that I wanted to learn. So on some of those skills and experiences that I was very deliberate about, going abroad as an example. I really wanted to have an international career, which I did. But some, Sonia, were, by luck. Sometimes you better be, it's better to be lucky than talented. So I've had the good fortune of having good opportunities along the way in my career. And most importantly, in both cases, whether it was deliberate choice or opportunities, I really picked in general the people I wanted to work with. Because and that's the way I am built and wired as an individual. I work for organization, but I want to work for people that I feel I have a connection and I trust the values and the direction and the moral compass they have. So that's a little bit about me and my career to set things up.
Well, thank you so much. I really love you sharing about your personal background. I'll say that I also find that, for leaders in general, our personal backgrounds always influence what kind of leader we are. I've been asked, about like, why am I in diversity, equity, and inclusion? I'm an engineer by training. I was in engineering roles and executive roles for a long time. But, I would say that my background, like yours, is very international. I have very mixed family. I have people of every religion and every corner of the world in my kind of my bloodline.
Yeah.
And so I always tell people that, like being inclusive and being diverse was just look at my family.
Natural for you, right?
It's a natural thing. So it's a really a good thing that in my second career I ended up here. So I love that you also kind of shared your international Brady Bunch. I'd love to get to know them at some point. And I think that just really brings a lot of richness, to the experience. And then as a leader, certainly. And then I love what you said about opportunities. I also feel I also that resonates with me too, because there's times in my career where I was offered roles that I remember once somebody came and a few people came to me and they were kind of like trying to console me because the role it was like a lateral. And it wasn't, I was slated for the next step, which would have been hierarchically, higher. But then I was asked, the companies merged with another company, and they asked me to kind of sidestep and do something else. But the CEO personally told me that was a really important thing for him. And I didn't even question or anything. I just was doing it. And then my colleagues would come up to me and in a consoling way, oh, maybe you did something wrong. Yeah. But it gave me such a diversity. So I think being open to opportunities is really critical, I think, for leaders. And you're right, just like you, I couldn't have charted this course if I had tried even, it just, things came my way. And a lot of times, I think the people that I was going to work with was a key factor, as you said, but also the challenge. I always wanted to do something new and different. I got somewhat easily bored also, which is not necessarily a good trait, but it's just this, you have just some different kind of traits, right? And I knew that about myself, and I knew that new things were always challenging for me, and they always made me very excited. So I think those are awesome things that you shared. Thank you for that. So let's find out a little bit. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say one of the things as well that my personal philosophy has always been to offer myself the choice in life, whether the choice was internal, the choice was external, and I will end with that before we switch to our topic, which was I always wanted to be there. And I knew why I was there, or why I decided not to stay sometime and to move on. And I think it's very important, because having that choice, certainly for me, and I think for everybody at any level, gives you even more clarity as to why you are where you are.
I love that too, because I am always so much about our approach and everything we do. And as a person, I was always about, I love Simon Sinek, right? It's start with the why, right? And, and it's so important, especially when you're trying to do new and different things and kind of be innovative and disruptive, which today, as we'll talk about, just everything that's going on in the world is causing us, especially in the HR world, to be innovative. And so we'll talk about that. But before we do that, since you've been so open about your personal life even, and I have too, and you've shared where you come from, let's find out a little bit more about our audience and why they are here today. The why is actually really relates well to this. So we want to find out in our second poll, if we could have it up, please. We want to find out what's the main reason for your organization's interest in workplace culture and DEI. You're here. Sometimes if it's your personal interest, that's fine too. You can include that. But a lot of times we find these are the top reasons. The CEO is really focused on it. There's some internal issues sometimes that are ongoing. There's external requirements sometimes. And in this, we include, your board requiring it, ESG compliance or, SEC or some of these things for public companies. But also there's companies that are not public and are focused on some requirements that maybe they're federal contractors or they're certain size, over 50 employees and so on. There's, a myriad of requirements now that apply. Hiring and retention is a good reason. A lot of people know that it really helps with hiring and retention. Sometimes maybe you have an internal champion, and it may be another reason. If you put other reason, you may want to put in the chat what that other reason is. We'll really appreciate that. But let's see. Yeah, I see that there's hiring and retention is a big one. Usually, it's the 60% that's consistent with what we see. And then the internal champion, either the CEO or someone other than the CEO. In this case, internal champion would be someone other than the CEO that's focused on it. So this again goes back to this idea of how important leadership is. And that shows up here. We do see external requirements sometimes as a big one too, and CEO focus as well when we do this. Again, we do it as most of our webinars and then through our surveys and research arm that does a lot of this research. So thank you for participating in that. And so you're right, Stéphane, let's now talk about the heart of the matter, and let's talk about the H word, hybrid work. In our earlier conversation, you pointed out that many, even big players, have yet to figure it out. For example, Google officially opened for returning employees, I think on April 4th. And the hybrid model they offered employees is 3 days in the office, 2 days working from home. But I just saw recently a former Google HR leader, Laszlo Bach, he left, I think, the company in 2016, but he came out in a recent Bloomberg News article. It was shortly after you and I talked last time, and said that the hybrid model won't survive, and most employees and eventually will want to be back in the office 5 days a week. But hybrid means different things to different people, right? So can you tell us? Can we just let's start with talking about what hybrid means at L'Oréal, and the thought process and criteria that led you to the definition and implementation of hybrid the way that you have defined it.
Yes, that's very interesting point of view of Laszlo Bog, certainly in terms of how the pendulum probably will come back to, but that, it could be an interesting topic. So for us, hybrid at L'Oréal mean what we call the best of both. Meaning, we have a hybrid model which gives 2 days of flexibility for people to work remotely, and 3 days where people have to be on site. And of course, that those 2 days of flexibility when you can work remotely provide that that ability for every single employees that whose job is, of course, can be performed remotely, to have a sense of, I do organize my work and some of the things that I have to do that I can be doing better at home or somewhere else, but remotely they can do it. And when we go on site, it's really focusing on the activities of collaboration, being together, co-creation, and we're really very purposeful about when you come on site. We don't want you to stay in an office because otherwise, what's the point? What do I commute? So we really focus on providing those opportunities. And the way we came to define our hybrid model, again, that we call the best of both, was really in back pre-pandemic, actually, Sonia, in sort of around 2018, 2019, we had some flexibility, but it was limited flexibility in terms of working remotely. But we knew that we had more and more requests coming from employees to have more flexibility. And actually, we were looking into that. And then March 2020 came along, and then we had to send pretty much everybody home, except, of course, our frontline workers. We did a fantastic job, coming in and out every day in our DC and manufacturing site and research labs. But that certainly accelerated the work we're doing. And what we did is we created a task force in the organization to say a couple of things. One, here's what we want you to do. You listen to employees, go and talk to employees. Here are some piece of research. Here are some benchmark that we know on what's going on with some companies. However, here are the key elements that you need to keep in mind when you're going to come with your recommendation. We will never be a culture or an organization that will thrive on 100% remote. So come back with a recommendation with a hybrid model. So we define exactly the sort of frame, and then we let that task force go on for a few months. And then they came back with a recommendation on, okay, this is the hybrid model and work that we recommend. And they came back with a matrix around, hey, this is why the type of work that you can do, when you're remote. However, when you come to the office, this is the type of work that we want you to focus on. We want people to see. So, and we actually implemented it early on. I think it was in, I want to say August 2020, Sonia, that we implemented that hybrid model, because we returned to the office fairly early. In June 2020, we were back in the office in person. Of course, it was very slowly, it was very progressive, and with we had various teams coming in different weeks, but we came back early. So that was our way to define and make sure people were heard in terms of what they were proposing, in a way that was fitting with our culture of thriving together, being together, keeping those cultural components that are unique to L'Oréal in terms of being together, and those moments of serendipity when you go to the cafeteria and you bump into someone you haven't seen, and the
Mhm.
human magic sort of happen.
Mm. No, it's super interesting that you went back so early. I mean, as you said, a lot of companies are doing it just now and starting to figure it out. But that's what I was very impressed when we first talked, was how long you've been at it. So that's why I thought you have really good lessons learned, and this conversation is really a great conversation around that. Let's find out, what are some of the challenges that our audience are facing in keeping this sense of togetherness. We'll come and, obviously the rest of our conversation will be about that. But before we prime everybody with some of your valuable insights, let's just see what are some of the challenges about, keeping this sense of togetherness in this hybrid world. So what are the key challenges that you see in terms of, going towards this hybrid world with a sense of togetherness? There's limited resources. Sometimes it's just budget and experienced staff. I mean, so what you described is really a great way to go about it, but some people can't necessarily be able to do that. And knowing what to measure to see even if it's working or not. Finding out how many people, really feel, okay with that. How are they feeling about the culture? That's another option. Engaging the whole organization, of course, to bring them together. And you had some good insights about that. Give them a reason. Why are they even there, right? And then improving the organization's brand. Sometimes, recruiting and all that is pretty important these days. So that's certainly one of the key ones. And then any other reasons. So we see a lot of people are saying that the challenge is knowing what to measure in terms of, what's working and what's not, and adjusting as you go. Of course, that's important. And then engaging the whole organization. And you have some innovative ideas about that that we'll talk about in a moment, Stéphane. But this is pretty consistent. We find that is usually the issue. A lot of times we see that people talk about finding out how employees really feel about the culture is an issue, and also just limited resources as well. So now that we find out a little bit more, let's go really to the heart of the matter here. Let's talk about, we like to in our webinars always give our audience some specific examples and ideas that they can, after this webinar, they can go out and implement. So let's start with what are some of the best things you found about hybrid work, and what are some of the challenges, any surprises, and what are you doing to address them? Then we can talk about some specific components as well in terms of how you've addressed them. But just generally overall, what have you seen work or not work so well?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that are really working is, of course, that ability to for the roles that can be performed remotely, the ability of seeing the work still being carried out in a way that is very effective. And to be honest, some of the type of work you're even more effective and more impactful when you do it remotely, because depending the type of work you have to do, sometimes it's better to be on your own, separately, when it's a very transactional task, or you have to go through emails or those type of things. There's no reason to come to an office and do 2 or 3 hours of commute every day when you're spending your day on that. So I think that's the good part. That ability as well to, depending what's happening in your life, in the world, to have again that flexibility, I think is truly mirroring what the sort of employee experience should be today in this day and age. Some of the challenges that we see is to make sure that when people come to the office, they're not spending their day in behind a camera or a screen, because otherwise it's really pointless. So it's really making sure you have that. And again, you need to be very specific. You need to train your organization. You need to be very, you need to spell that out very explicitly to make sure people understand. Some of the challenges as well is, when everybody was home, in a way, working remotely, well, it was everybody did it through a camera and a screen. When people come back, but still you have few people
Right.
or a portion of them, you need to make sure that the people who are back together uh, don't forget that there are some people still on the screen. And so you need to make sure that, again, the way you lead, the way you facilitate a discussion, the way you engage, again, you need to train specifically everybody at every, leader, manager, and employees to make sure they are really working and acknowledging the true hybrid model. Because if you're putting a hybrid model, but the truth is when you have some meetings and people are talking amongst themselves in the meeting room, not acknowledging, not engaging the people on the screen, it's a challenge. Um, some of the surprises, I must say, I was very impressed by the ability. I mean, certainly at L'Oréal, we're a very in-person type of culture pre-pandemic. I was very impressed by our ability to pivot
Mm.
to fully virtual during the peak of the pandemic, where
Mm.
the technology was there, was working. We pivoted on, if I'm thinking about HR from a learning standpoint, we deployed an ability and a learning and development curriculum virtually for people to continue to upskill themselves and grow. I mean, I was just blown away, to be honest. It was a great surprise. um, some of the bad surprises, the only thing I can say is, as I'm sure you know, Sonia, every single crisis reveals the best and the worst.
Yeah.
And those crises we've went through, whether it was a social crisis, health crisis, political crisis in the U.S., it was the same. We saw the best and the worst. We saw people being very selfish.
Mm.
We saw people being very generous with others. But that's what you would expect. So
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. There are, people often say, well, you get to know your friends or your team or whatever, in these hard times. I actually think you get to know yourself as well, because people are. You can surprise yourself, because you haven't been in that situation, and then kind of some primal instincts, take over, and you have to. In these extreme situations, see how you're able to deal with it. So I think that overall, I think there has been an opportunity. Not everybody has taken advantage of the opportunity, but I think there's been an opportunity for growth for everyone. And
definitely.
sometimes going back and not just questioning how other people are behaving in these environments, but how are you behaving? And is that the person you thought you were or you want to be going
Hmm.
forward?
Yeah.
So in that context, I think, is it coming back to the business aspects and a workplace. How has this experience and this continuing new normal impacting your selection process, training, expectations of your leaders?
Yeah. So, one of the things that in the last poll you were mentioning, the impact on the culture. Some of that has had a very big impact on the culture, because as we know, during those past 18 months, 2 years, you have a lot of people that have joined an organization virtually, and the impact on the culture, if you're not being very mindful of how do you bring those new joiners on board, how do you make space and opportunities for them to be connected to the culture, again, either virtually or in person, depending the culture of your own organization is key. And to your question, then I want to say it's, again, great opportunities, but also some things to be mindful of. So great opportunity for leaders to access, when we think about connecting with others, connecting with talent or hiring. Great opportunity. I can connect with anybody. Everyone is one click away, basically, uh, from me, from anyone, any leader. I don't have to go into a specific place. I don't have to travel to meet with you, Sonya. I can just click a button, I join, and I can see you. I can speak to you. So great opportunity to tap into a large pool of talent almost instantly. So I think this is very important. The piece that we are also being mindful of is the things that I see on screen are only a piece of what the company culture is, of what I have a sense for in terms of the person. So making sure that we still provide an opportunity for people to connect with their colleagues, come to an office and a workspace where they will have a sense of what is this company really about? What is L'Oréal DNA? What are the values? So what we try to do is to provide a sort of a frame for managers and for leaders, and give that sort of freedom to operate within that frame for them with some guidance. What's interesting is when people worked completely remotely during the pandemic, of course, they felt safe being home. And then when we started to return to the office, there was a little bit of hesitancy, certainly, because we started to bring people back early. But then past that first hesitancy, the joy of reconnection and being together really took over. And this is where you need to capitalize on those moments to really make sure that people are coming to the office in an inclusive environment, to make sure that everybody is being seen, that everybody, whether they're in person or virtually. And those are the things that I want to say influenced and impacted the way we hired people, the way we onboarded them, and the way we gave them some opportunities in that new world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you said, I mean, you were always a people kind of a culture, people first culture. So I was reflecting on two things really during this whole pandemic. I've been reflecting on how would I now be as a leader in an organization, the type of organization I had before. Now we have a small company. We are by definition, it's kind of software kind of company mostly, and consulting and so on, and can very easily be done, remotely. But when I was in charge of like manufacturing facilities and people in that had, like you said, first line people that had to be there, like your business, and when there were thousands of people, not just tens of people, how would that be different for me? So that's the first question I've been asking myself during this whole pandemic. And then also the second one is, my son is grown, is an adult. I have one son, and he's a grown adult and amazing young man that I can go on and on talking about him, but I won't. I'll stop. But my heart goes out to parents with small children during this period. And as I think about that, I think the one thing that I would do differently, probably, if I were in charge of thousands of people now, is that most of the time we tested things, and my HR leadership partner, partners were amazing, and they really made sure that we kind of found out what most of the people found acceptable, or desired. Now, I think what's very different, and I wonder how you think about this, is that if we're going to really be inclusive and have a culture of togetherness, it is defined, that culture is much more so defined by the outliers than the majority. And so what I would want to find out now, which is hard to do, of course, is find out those people who have very unique needs, whether it's where they live, their family situation, their responsibilities outside of work, all the things that frankly were not on our radar before.
Absolutely. And what you're highlighting, Sonya, for me is if I had to pick one leadership trait that really changed, that the pandemic has changed, is the ability to be even more empathetic and listen. to their people and find out really who they are and what moves them, what's really getting them motivated, started. So that ability to listen, to be more an empathetic leader has certainly been in all, certainly in my organization at L'Oréal, but also when I talk to some of my peers around in other companies or industry, this is something that I believe that's one of the silver lining in my mind of the pandemic. I talked earlier about flexibility, which is one big one, but that notion of more empathetic leadership, more authentic, more listening posture is something that I would pick as the number one leadership trait that has been really put under the spotlight during that pandemic.
No, absolutely. And I think it's also redefined or maybe highlighted the difference between equality and equity. Where equality is providing basically the same thing to everybody, but equity is really providing different things to different people based on their needs. And so it makes the job, frankly, a lot harder. In that context, we have a question actually coming in. We appreciate the question. It's talking about, they are a commercial interiors dealer and designer, and they're interested in, if the work environment itself, was modified for the hybrid model in some way. And I think it leads to some of the conversation we're going to have around facilities and just environment.
Yeah, so it's interesting because obviously part of certainly the key components we talked about when that task force came back with the recommendation. Again, they had a very clear matrix on what can be done at anywhere at any time versus what has to be done in person. They looked at that, but also they consider what are the key elements for a successful hybrid work model. We focused on meetings, making sure that you're not going to be back to back. So simple things such as, hey, now every single meeting lasts 50 minutes, because otherwise you're spending your time, joining a meeting, leaving one, rejoining another one, and you don't have time for yourself. So simple things as now every meeting lasts 50 minutes before you start another one. Another one was, how do we look at the agenda and how do people and a critical one was the workspace.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make sure that our workspace that was not completely designed for that hybrid model is going to work? Meaning all of simple things such as all of the meeting room have to be equipped with the technology that will enable that hybrid to be, sort of effective and feel like the people who are on the screen will be feeling that they're being included in part of the meeting and vice versa. So the workplace, plays a critical role. And the truth of the matter is, when you start from a white page of paper, like we're doing on the West Coast, actually we're going to be neighbors, Sonia,
Yes.
in the LA area, it's easier because there's nothing. So you can start and create it, you can create your blueprint yourself. And what we've done there is work with employees and leaders to design the sort of hybrid workplace. But unlike the future LA office, our New York office was not designed like that. So we're now making transformation progressively and throughout the building to enable that new culture of hybrid model. But then, of course, when like simple things of ordering screens, as an example, because of the supply issue, global supply issue, now it takes ages to get little things. But if you don't have an enabling workspace and workplace, then it's going to be clunky. People are going to say, well, I'm in a sort of a meeting room, but I don't really I don't really see people the same way. I'm actually better in my office instead of going to a meeting room. So the workplace is a key enabler of success of your new hybrid model.
Yes. No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the workspace is so important in many respects. I had an experience that I think I've shared with you where we were asked when I was, in a kind of a traditional, environment of aerospace and defense industry. We were intending to be more innovative and to attract more, tech companies and startups and so on to us to come and work with us on some groundbreaking technologies. And we certainly couldn't welcome them and have them be effective in the, you can imagine a defense facility is one of the
to be very screened, right?
yeah, usually no windows and very difficult to get in and out of and so on, for good reason. But for this purpose, again, it goes back to the why, right? Why? I mean, if you're doing traditional, classified work, obviously those are appropriate. But if you're coming in to show your technology and see if it's appropriate to integrate into, you're coming to a big company, you're a small company, you're maybe few founders, and you come, it can be a daunting thing, right? And it can actually dissuade you from coming in. So the first thing we did in that, and this was a few years ago, was first go about designing the process, kind of like what you described. So what is the process of innovation? As you said, what's the process of doing work and togetherness, in your case, where you set out to do your West Coast facility. That I'm excited, it's getting, to see that someday. But it just so important to design that process first. And so we had this wise counsel from our designers, and we kind of went along and we said, okay, well, let's do that. And it was really time well spent, because we ended up with a very circular facility, very easy to get in and out of. And the facility ended up being designed completely around that process of innovation, and became very, very successful. I was, to some extent, surprised, frankly, by how much the facility design impacted the way that we did work in that facility.
That's for sure. And I can tell you, and I'm sure you're aware of that, of course, but right now, the number of new projects that are, architects and builders, they're busy throughout the country, because so many companies are rethinking, of course, their real estate footprint. One, two, their interior design to be, conducive to collaboration. So there's a lot going on, and it is true that when we think about broadly the employee experience, the physical workspace plays a key role in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at home too, I think to some extent, with hybrid work, we shouldn't forget, as you said, the remote workers, right? What is their work environment? And can the company, I know some tech companies on the West Coast, especially, that have actually shipped home, a lot of equipment, and not just screens, but other things, desks and chairs and other things. If you're going to sit on this chair and be in front of this screen all day long, some things to help them with, having a better experience while working from home as well.
Of course.
Yeah. So let's talk about just this idea, a little bit more about this idea of togetherness and inclusion, right? I mean, I think that's a wonderful word that is somewhat, maybe gives the same sense, right, of how do you make sure that people are included. And there's I've heard, two completely opposing schools of thought. One says that, oh, well, now everybody is, like you said, a click away, and you have actually better access to others. And so maybe that makes it more inclusive. And then the other one, which you also mentioned earlier, is, but then some people are there, some people are not, in person. And there also, it's kind of easier in a virtual world to kind of mute people or not pay attention to them. You can even remove them really easily, from using the technology. Whereas, in a physical world, you can't just remove people.
Ignore them, right?
So what's your like in the net, right? I realize there's differences, but puts and takes. But in the net, do you think that this idea of the virtual capabilities in the hybrid world makes workplaces by nature just more inclusive or less so? And then what do we have to be mindful of to ensure that it does remain or becomes more inclusive, where everybody feels like they can belong and contribute.
I think, yeah, no, it's a great question. And my point of view on the topic is it's both. I think it does make the workplace more inclusive. If you think about, and we're going to take an example, the introverts. When you would have had pre-pandemic, everyone around the meeting room table, and the loudest, the more extrovert might be the one that are going to be very comfortable speaking in public, and I don't want to make a caricature. Of course, I'm an introvert myself, but some of the people that might be more reserved in a more large audience, it's easier and more inclusive, certainly. And this is what some of the researchers that I've seen have shown, where people, through the governance, they can raise their hand, they can put some of their comments and have their voice heard, maybe in a different way. So from that standpoint, in my mind, it's more inclusive. It's also more inclusive because, maybe in the past where I would have had to struggle to get to a different site, I'm not sure I was going to be on time, or I can't travel. When now everybody can be, thanks to the technology on the same call, whether I'm sitting in Shanghai or I'm in Rome or New York. So from that standpoint, it's more inclusive. The piece that we were mentioning as a joke, which is, hey, maybe sometimes I ignore them when they're on the screen, where I can't ignore them when in the room. It really forces you as a manager, as a leader, as basically a human person, to make sure you are not forgetting them, that you are giving the sort of airtime, that you're not, just because they're not present in the room in the moment, unconsciously excluding people. So it does require, in my mind, education, training on that type of behavior. And we know what's the most difficult is changing human behavior. And so that's my answer, Sonia, if that makes sense. I think it
No, I think you're
is
right.
in one way. Yeah.
It's hard to know. I think time will tell. I think over time we'll see if overall people, I've seen data that people were actually more productive and more engaged during a certain period of the pandemic initially, and then there was some dips and things. People got kind of tired of that, and there was some uncertainties. So I think a lot goes into that, and it's hard to establish causality and to kind of get that answer for the net, is it better or worse? I think no matter what, it's actually my answer. My own answer to my own question is, it almost doesn't matter. I mean, it matters.
It's the reality today.
It's the
So you
reality
have
we
to
have
do
to
that.
live. So what we
Absolutely.
must do is make the best of it. And so the question becomes, how do you make the best of it? How do you make sure that you're aware of the the downsides of it? As an example, I'll ask you to maybe give us a specific one here, because I know you work on this sort of thing. Is some people have said it's they're worried that if their life situation or the type of job that they have actually is more conducive to be more remote, that how would that affect their performance appraisals, their promotion opportunities, succession planning, this sort of thing. How do you ensure, if you could share any specifics, that doesn't, people don't get unfairly treated in that? Are there any new ways in which you have to address that versus when everybody was there?
I think it certainly, this is what we've noticed, it pushes everybody to be clearer, to speak more, to connect more often and more frequently, and have discussion, as opposed to, in the past, certainly in our organization, you did set up your objective at the beginning of the year, and then, in the best case scenario, you would discuss that at mid-year and then at year end. Now, I think what it forces organizations to do between manager and employees is to have more regular conversation. Not only to check in, by the way, on how are you doing, Sonia, what's going on, and trying to understand and go deeper in the one, understanding the situation of the individual, but also, okay, let's talk about what progress have we made since the last time we spoke. So certainly I see more frequent conversation, that are ongoing, which I think it's for the better, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's for me what I see in terms of having a sense of the performance of the individual and how it's evolving. Um, More frequent conversation, more connected, more focused, as opposed to something very formal that we only look at twice a year, in a way.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it does sharpen our skills. It doesn't require us to sharpen our skills, both as leaders and also, frankly, as individual contributors. Trying to keep track of what they're doing and how it's really impacting. You can't just kind of make up for not meeting some objectives with some FaceTime. As we refer to it. And I think for example, for the DEI work itself and the initiatives, obviously it's more visible now just because of some of the racial unrest and some of the issues that have come up in recent times. But I think it also, because it's virtual and you can't just have a few networking events and call that your DEI effort, it's causing people to be more treated like part of the business. So like what we do and some of the software we have, for example, you can have actually a rigorous project management for your DEI efforts. So, and it could be really used for the capability can be used for any part of business, but really having everybody, assign actions clearly, and then have those people report, weekly or at least monthly, update the progress. And if the progress doesn't look like it's good, have some metrics around that. So all of that is like a rigorous way of managing business anyway. And you have to kind of, and DEI has been the farthest from that, like people managing it this way. So we've said, look, you got to manage it that way, and you should actually manage all of your business this way.
The business.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other part that you also brought up that I want to highlight is also this idea that, just as you talk about the performance reviews, it's also about the surveys. It used to be enough to do surveys, once a year or maybe a little bit more often, maybe twice a year. But that's just not enough now because so many things are happening. I mean, you look at a span of any one of these years that we've been through, 2020 and 2021 and now 2022, thus far, there's new stuff happening all the time. There's inflation, there's, the price of gas at the at the pump. And so people, all these stresses affect people, regardless of how directly they're connected with their jobs. So again, we have, the way we approach it, and of course through software and technology, it's made possible really, is to have ongoing sort of ways to assess, how employees are feeling, how your infrastructure, the level of diversity, equity, and inclusion through, some specific questions that at any time in the year can be updated, versus, just once a year when you administer a survey. So we take a continuous kind of continuing assessment mindset towards this.
Fully agree. And what for me, it also put the spotlight on in that hybrid world is the need for focus. Because as you mentioned, Sonya, there's so many things happening in this world. And certainly the hybrid world has accelerated the level of information and the density of information coming to any type of individual. And that need for closer connection, if you're a manager with your team, checking in, more regular, frequent conversation can really become very overwhelming, very heavy to carry if you're not hyper-focused on what are the things that matter, so this is what we really figured out, which was, if you're not focused, and you're going to lose yourself and spread yourself too thin. So that need for the clear frame for individuals or teams is paramount.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more again. So let's just, as a last part of this, also talk about, for a moment, about you're a global company, you're a global leader. What similarities and differences have you seen? You've talked about hybrid as a competitive advantage, for example. What's your advice for the leaders tuning in today in terms of key criteria to think about, especially if they're a global company, and to what extent is it different or similar across such a company?
So I think as a global company, what we've established early on is a sort of a common frame. And that common frame was, hey, we're going to go hybrid. So you have to decide, other global companies have said, some technology companies in particular, we're going to be able to allow full remote for, so we aligned very early on this is our model. And globally, we will allow, up to 2 days of remote work. Then what's different is where's your starting point? What's your culture? In the US, for us, it was an obvious one to say, we're going to move to up to 2 days, right away. I know in some other countries in the world, people felt because they were not at all a flexible culture to start with. So their starting point was 100% in person, no remote work. Some of my colleagues around the world have said, well, we're going to start by up to 1 day, and we'll see how it goes. So I think what's important when you're a global company is to have a frame, but then within the frame have a sort of test and learn type of attitude for what's going to be working, because not every country, not every culture will move at the same pace.
No, that's excellent advice. Yes, being inclusive, right? Being inclusive of all the different cultures and what they're comfortable with. We have a few minutes left, so I'm going to put up just this couple of slides, and then we'll see what other questions we can answer here, Stéphane, in the few minutes left. But in terms of our webinars, we always like to say, okay, so what's next, right? There is a DEI survey that we offer to anyone that's been on our webinars. You can receive the 2022 State of D&I report by taking this survey. The link is there, and we can also share it later. But also you can take advantage of a complimentary session with a DEI advisor to just talk about what your issues are, what you're dealing with. Some of this conversation may have triggered some thoughts and you want to talk about it more. You just email Carolyn at OurOffice.io and then mention that you've been in the OurOffice webinars to get that, as a complimentary. I also want to make sure that I put up, of course, the codes for the recertification credits. So you see here for SHRM, and you see it for HRCI, and you can see that you can apply these for your recertification credits. If there are any other questions, please put them in. Otherwise, we'll just talk amongst ourselves. Also here, Stéphane, what as we leave here the last couple of minutes here, what are your plans for the next 12 months or so? What's ahead for L'Oréal USA and for Stéphane?
So for L'Oréal USA, we've just announced, actually yesterday, we released our quarterly results at a group level and also in the region. We continue a very strong growth throughout the organization, the company, and also it's driven by North America and the US. So we're going to continue to build on that momentum, and that's a great feeling, so we're going to continue that growth, and people are very excited. From a people standpoint, there's obviously the continuous momentum on building an organization that is also transforming itself to become more digital, to become more agile, to continue to fine-tune, talking about hybrid work on some of the things that we continue to learn, because this is our sort of mindset. We want to be able to pivot quickly. If I want to be very tactical, we're still waiting for some furniture to arrive in some of the places because that's what we're missing to really provide our employees the full new hybrid experience. So that's more on the funny side and the anecdote. Personally, I look forward to more togetherness with my family. Raising some now almost all of them young adults spread out in North America. It's always a pleasure to have those moments together. So a little bit like mirroring an organization. When we come together, it's important to celebrate those moments. Personally, I look forward to celebrate those moments with my family.
Well, that's awesome. I wish you all the best in that, and also with L'Oréal and the launch of your new building. And I guess a lot of people, if they don't have furniture like you, they can just stand most of the time. I think you stand a lot of
I have a
times.
standing desk, actually. It's
I
good
know,
for my back. So
which is awesome. And you can just tell people it's good for their wellness. They can stand.
exactly. No need for chairs, right?
No, but again, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time
You're very
and
welcome,
gracious
Sonya.
and informative. We really appreciate it. We wish you all the best, and with both personally and professionally. And I look forward to seeing you in LA sometime very soon.
Absolutely. I will let you know. Thank you very much, Sonya, for having me. Pleasure.
Absolutely. And thank you very much to our audience. Again, the recording will be available. Please join us on our future webinar next month, May 26th, and it'll be about ESG. So we look forward to seeing you all. Okay,
Great.
bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.